Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden, and we will get to the fantasy portion of today's show shortly. But first, we need to address the wild weekend that ended Week 7. First, the milestones. Andrei Vasilevskiy recorded his 200th career win in the Lightning's 3-0 shutout victory over Seattle on Friday. Connor McDavid became the fourth fastest player to have 400 assists earlier that week. Kris Russell, he recorded his 2000th blocked shot on Saturday, passing Brent Seabrook for the most in NHL history. That's kind of an underrated statistic. I can't even imagine blocking 200 shots, let alone 2,000 in your career. That's crazy. The Stars' Joe Pavelski opened Friday's 3-1 win over the Avalanche with a pair of goals, becoming just the 10th American-born player to reach 400 in his career. Hopefully you watched last week's episode and picked up Jake Ottinger before he extended his personal win streak to 4 games, and he's basically keeping Dallas afloat in the Central all by himself right now. However, that hasn't kept teams from calling the Stars looking to trade for pending free agent defenseman John Klingberg. The 29-year-old is reportedly looking for an 8-year, $60 million deal, which obviously would be extremely hard for Dallas to fit under the cap. So that's something to keep an eye on. Senators goalie Matt Murray cleared waivers on Sunday, and he is going to be sent to their AHL affiliate in Belleville. Ottawa hopes he can rediscover his game there back to when he was a Stanley Cup champion, why they gave him that huge 4-year contract. He just hasn't lived up to that in Ottawa so far, and it looks like in the short term they're going to head in a different direction. Also, the Sharks placed embattled winger Evander Kane on waivers on Sunday as well, with his suspension coming to an end. The next game he would have been available to play for San Jose, but it looks like they're trying to work out some kind of trade or maybe just have him down in the minors for some sort of conditioning stint before they bring him back into the lineup. San Jose's general manager, Doug Wilson, is also taking a temporary medical leave. So that might have something to do with San Jose wanting to hold off on making that Kane decision in the meantime. In other front office news, this was a huge bombshell. Canadiens assistant GM Scott Mellanby resigned on Saturday after being told he was no longer under consideration to be the team's next GM or president of hockey ops. Now, reportedly, he had been told he was being considered for those positions, so obviously he wasn't very happy and considered it untenable to stay there. Then on Sunday, the organization basically cleared house. They fired GM Marc Bergevin and 2 others within the organization before naming former Rangers GM Jeff Gorton as their new president of hockey operations. Let's get to the fun stuff, though, Steele. Bruins pest Brad Marchand ticked off Artemi Panarin enough that the bread man threw his glove at him from bench to bench. Panarin, he followed that up with a really great quote about the $5,000 fine being well worth it thanks to that mega contract that Gorton actually signed him to. And the hottest story, though, from Saturday night was Kings forward Brendan Lemieux receiving a 5-minute match penalty after Senators captain Brady Tkachuk claimed to have been bitten by him. The video seemed to show as much as well. The NHL has offered Lemieux an in-person hearing, which, I mean, that basically means he's going to get a suspension of 5 games or more. It would be extremely surprising if it was less than that. And if you haven't seen Tkachuk's post-game comments either, they're worth a look. They're hilarious. He basically laid into Lemieux. He called him a joke, a bad guy, a bad player, a brickhead, a ton of other comments. Really hilarious stuff. Pun intended here, Steele. We've got plenty to chew on there from everything that I just mentioned. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, so you know what? I'll start with the milestones. You listed off a couple of milestones there, and I'll start off with Andrei Vasilevskiy of the Tampa Bay Lightning. 200 career wins. He's had an absolutely fantastic career so far. 200 wins, 86 losses, 22 overtime losses with 28 shutouts. He's won 2 Stanley Cups now back-to-back, looking to go for triple this year with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that's why I think he's the best goalie the best active goalie in the NHL right now. Like, this guy just continues to prove why he's the best. 200 wins in less than 330 games is just absolutely ridiculous in my opinion. So that's why I have him as the number 1 goalie in the NHL. We'll go over to Kris Russell for the Edmonton Oilers. This guy, to have 2,000 blocks in a career and be the first player to ever have 2,000 blocks is just incredible. And I was looking at the list for people who have the most blocks. The second most blocks in the NHL is Brent Seabrook, and he's played 224 more games than Kris Russell has, and he has 5 less blocks than him. So the fact that Russell has 2,000 blocks in only 890 games is just incredible feat for him. He puts his body on the line every single day. He's averaged 2.25 blocks a game pretty much in his career, which is just unheard of. So for me, what an absolutely incredible and kind of weird stat to put out there, but 2,000 blocks is just incredible. Definitely a bunch of bruises for a lifetime over the span of his career. Now we'll go over to Connor McDavid, 4th fastest to 400 assists ever in the NHL, which to me is it just proves once again how special of a player Connor McDavid is. And to me, I think by the end of his career, if he honestly just wins one Stanley Cup, by the end of his career, he to me will be the greatest hockey player that will have ever lived and to have ever played the game. Better than Wayne Gretzky, which is a very, very big statement right there. But that's just how good of a hockey player Connor McDavid is in the way the game is played right now. And then for Joe Pavelski, this guy has just been dominant over his entire career, still looking to win a Stanley Cup. So for me, 10th American to score 400 goals is just an absolute incredible feat again. So all of those milestones, congratulations to those guys. And again, everyone on that list and getting those milestones more than deserves it. We'll go over to the altercations, the 2 altercations right now. We'll start with Artemi Panarin and Brad Marchand. And, I watched the game. I watched the entire game. It was getting chippy, and a lot of it was coming from Brad Marchand. And clearly something was said that was offensive to Artemi Panarin and why he threw his glove over there. After the game, Brad Marchand, he was making a couple of jokes saying that obviously Artemi Panarin didn't like what I had for Thanksgiving dinner. That's why he was a little upset. But, there's a lot of rumors coming out right now. Nothing has been confirmed, but some words towards Artemi Panarin saying, Russian-centric comments, saying that no one over there likes him. He's involved with Vladimir Putin, who's spoken out about obviously last year. So to me, obviously Brad Marchand definitely said something to get under a Panarin's skin, and we've seen the type of person Brad Marchand can be in the past. We know that he'll do anything he can to irritate the opposition, and clearly he did something to do that. So in Panarin's case, $5,000 well spent. A glove to the body is not really going to do much, but it gets you a little bit. It's a laughable incident. It gets a little bit of jokes out there. So definitely something was said, but we'll leave it at that. And hopefully the NHL might get into an investigation for that. We'll go over to the Ottawa Senators and the LA Kings game last night. And I would actually like to hear your take on this too. And then I'd like to jump over to the Marc Bergevin incident. But to start with the Ottawa Senators, what happened last night was just absurd. Brady Tkachuk was absolutely right for calling him out like that. Lemieux is not a star in the league. He's not a special player. He has a job, but he's good at the job. He's a gritty guy. He's a physical guy. He does his job well. But to bite someone is just absolutely bush league. Brendan Lemieux is the type of guy, he fights, he instigates. From time to time, he'll put the puck in the back of the net. But what he did last night was just absolutely bush league. He's an absolute doughhead for biting someone, especially in a time when there's COVID going around and, all of this thing, NHL games potentially being postponed, infecting one another. Who knows if he might have it or not, if he's asymptomatic, whatever it is. But to physically bite someone in a fight, you're not a man, you're not a person for biting someone. That a person just doesn't do that to another person. It's just uncalled for. It's bush league. It shouldn't be in the NHL. I would be surprised if he gets any less than 8 games. I think he deserves more than 8 games. You just don't bite someone, especially in times like this. I would like to hear your opinion on the Brendan Lemieux incident, because to me, I'm just flabbergasted right now.
Yeah, frankly, I was shocked. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think the COVID factor is really important. I'd be shocked too if he gets anything less than 5 or 6 games at least. He's got a history. He's crossed the line a whole bunch of times. The NHL is a physical league. Guys do a lot of things and they can cause a lot of harm and things can get rough. But there's a very small list of things that you just don't do. And we talked about Brad Marchand when he licked people, he licked their face. That's one thing you don't do. Biting people, poking people in the eye, pulling their hair. there's just a few couple of things that you really shouldn't cross that line. And I think every player in the league should be able to agree, okay, biting somebody is just taking it a little bit too far. So yeah, I was kind of blown away, and like Kachuk's reaction was hilarious. Like not many players I think would go out, and he said, I'm only going to address this one time, but he made the most of that one time. He came out and basically said everything he possibly could think of, trashed this guy, saying that his teammates don't even like him. Nobody in the league likes him. He can't believe he even has a job. And like, frankly, I kind of agree with him, because it's getting to the point where that's all Lemieux does. Like, at least Marchand, he's one of the most talented players in the league. Yeah, he gets under guys' skin, and like he'll cross the line or straddle the line most of the time and do some dirty things. But like Lemieux doesn't have anything else to his game. All he has is that antagonistic, dirty style. So yeah, I could do without him for sure.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what Brady Tkachuk said. It honestly might be true that no one likes to play with this guy, and teams might not even like to have him on a team. I was looking; he's played on 3 different teams in the last 4 years, and all in the last 3 years of them being cut in half seasons. So to me, I think Brady Tkachuk was absolutely spot on with every single thing that he did last night. He only wanted to mention it once, but he did the best that he could do, and he made it all worth it. So to me, I can't wait to see Ottawa play against the LA Kings next time. And honestly, I can't wait to see Calgary play the LA Kings next time, because Matthew Tkachuk might have something to say about that too. But I'll move forward to the Marc Bergevin Montreal Canadiens scenario. And what a complete 180 that was from last season in the playoffs, making it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, and then to the way they started for the first 25% of the season this year. A lot comes into the scenario. Obviously, Carey Price has not been with the team. He had to take a step back and work on himself mentally, physically, whatever it may be. And we hope that he's still doing really, really good right now. Obviously, Shea Weber's out of the lineup, and we don't know where he's at with his future in the NHL and his career. A lot changed for the team as well. Cole Caulfield was sent down. They brought in Christian Dvorak, who wasn't really producing as well. Jonathan Drouin came back into the lineup. There's a lot that went on this season that was very different for the Montreal Canadiens last year. I think that came into play, but again, there has to be a change at some point, and you don't really look to anyone besides the GM, because they did just change up their head coach in Ducharme. So for me, I think it was the right call to finally change it up. And Marc Bergevin did a tremendous job for the time that he was there with the Montreal Canadiens, but it definitely was time for change.
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall for him, when his right-hand man walked away. And like, if the organization is telling him you're not going to be under consideration to replace Bergevin, it's clear that they want to go in a completely different direction. So I wasn't very surprised that they got rid of Bergevin early. It doesn't make sense to have him like be the GM for the rest of the season as a lame duck, no contract past this year, especially with how Montreal is doing. But I looked this up. I couldn't find it before the show. I can't imagine there is any other general manager in the history of the NHL that 23 games after bringing their team all the way to the Stanley Cup final, they got fired. Like that's crazy to think. Leafs fans would be happy if their team got out of the first round. And this guy brought the Canadiens all the way to the Cup final, and he's gone not even 25 games later. So like, what is the expectation in Montreal? Like, I understand where you're saying, you agree with them going a different direction. And this has nothing to do with Gorton. I think that he's actually a really good choice. I think he did a lot of good things in New York. He wasn't perfect, but he made a lot of really good decisions. They have a great core there. And I think he'll be good in Montreal. But like, what more could they possibly expect from Bergevin? You mentioned Shea Weber's gone. Like, people kind of knocked him for that trade at first. Clearly, Weber was the better player in that Subban trade. Like, he made so many good moves, a lot of good draft picks. Toffoli was a nice signing. He made a couple good trades that at the time people kind of said it didn't look like a good deal, and it ended up in the long run being better for Montreal. So while I understand wanting to go in a different direction, if I'm Marc Bergevin, I'm kind of thinking, what more could I have done to keep this job?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation, and I completely agree with you. There really wasn't much more that he could have done to keep his job. When things aren't working, you have to look to someone to blame, and that's exactly what goes on in this situation. He goes out of his way, or not out of his way, but he goes out and gets Christian Dvorak, who looked really good in the preseason. Josh Anderson a couple of years ago to that big contract, which I still think he got a little bit overpaid. All of these players that he brought in are not really producing right now, and for a person like Cole Caulfield, who we all thought would get 30-plus goals, who we thought would be Rookie of the Year, and get sent down to begin the season, everything just went completely wrong to start. Once they lost in the Stanley Cup Finals, in the offseason, and pretty much once the season began. Everything went completely wrong for them. Carey Price not coming back because he has to work on himself, which is very understandable. Shea Weber having the injury that he has that could potentially end his career in the NHL. The players that they have should be producing, but they're just not. A guy like Brendan Gallagher, who's supposed to be the leader in the heart of the team, who still is, but again, just not really producing up front in the offensive position. So for me, I agree with you. There really isn't much more that Bergevin could have done to protect his job as general manager of the Montreal Canadiens. But again, they just need to look to someone to blame and just change things up. Because if you don't change things up and it continues to go in that downward spiral and it just keeps continuing to snowball and not getting better and it continues to get worse, yeah, you might find yourself at the bottom of the league and with a first round pick or the first overall pick and maybe potentially getting Shane Wright. But that's not what they wanted to do after just being in the Stanley Cup Finals. So again, they needed some change, and I think as much as it sucked for Bergevin, it was probably the right thing to do for the Montreal Canadiens.
Well, we could talk about these developments all day, but in the interest of fantasy managers everywhere, let's move on to our free agent and waiver targets for Week 8. Starting with players owned in 50% of fantasy leagues or fewer, who's your first target this week, Steele?
Yeah, I mentioned him back in Week 5, and I'm going to mention him again. It's Jordan Eberle, and he's owned at 41% across Yahoo Fantasy Leagues. Since I mentioned him back in Week 5, he scored 6 goals and 3 assists in that time. He's up to 177.10 fantasy points since then. He's played 9 games in that time since Week 5, and he went from 96 fantasy points to 177. So again, even though Seattle's not playing the best right now, even though they're probably one of the worst teams in the league, you can still find some players on those teams that aren't producing as a team and find players that are still producing for the team. This guy, Jordan Eberle, again, I'm gonna put Jaden Schwartz in there. You guys can pick both those guys up because they're owned less than 50%. So again, I'm going to go with a guy like Jordan Eberle. I like what he's done so far, and I think he's going to continue that for the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot, Steele. And I think that, it's sometimes worth revisiting guys that we mentioned earlier on in the season who are maybe still exceeding, projections or look like they have a good slate coming up. Maybe they're heating up and getting hot. So even a guy, if you've looked to him in the past, maybe he worked out for you, maybe he didn't. It might be a good idea sometimes to go back and give him another chance. I'm going to go to Trevor Zegras, and he's just an all-around stud. This guy had such high expectations coming into the year, but Troy Terry and Ryan Getzlaf, they're getting most of the attention on that team right now, and rightly so. They're both playing really well, but I think Zegras deserves some of these fantasy managers' attention as well. He has 9 points in his last 6 games to go along with 14 penalty minutes, 3 hits, 4 power play points, and 13 shots. Zegras is centering Anaheim's second line, and he's playing the point on their top power play. I think just like it took him some time to acclimate to the speed of the game last year in his short little time with the team, I think he also needed some experience being a centerman, especially a top 6 centerman, facing off against such great opposition night in and night out. I think he's finally comfortable there, and I think you're seeing the results of that right now. I love the Ducks' schedule as well coming up here. Only 4 teams play 4 times this week, so I don't think you're losing that much picking a guy like Zegras. Anaheim plays 3 times this week. Most other teams do too. So a lot of times I'll look at how many times does a guy play. I think this is one of those weeks you don't necessarily have to lean on that quite as much, and you can go with a guy whose production you want to follow rather than how many times he's going to be on the ice. Now, there's 2 ways you can kind of handle Zegras, in my opinion, as well. If you add him before Tuesday's game, put him in your lineup, he'll be in there for 3 of the next 4 days. And then you can either drop him after Friday's game, pick someone up playing a back-to-back on the weekend that'll fill a spot in your lineup this week for 5 of the 7 days with just 2 waiver moves. The other option, which I like a little better, you're going to need to have a good team and afford to be able to do this, though, probably leading your matchup and be high up in the standings in your league, is to hold on to him for week 9. Anaheim starts and finishes next week with a back-to-back. They've got another game in the middle. So they play 5 times in 7 days. You rarely see a team play 5 times in 1 week. So I think if Zegras keeps this production up this week, he might even be worth holding on to next week as well. Let's move on to players owned in 35% of fantasy leagues or less. Who are you taking?
Yeah, for 35% or less, I've got Tage Thompson of the Buffalo Sabres. He's owned at 32%. And I really like what he's done so far this season. He's a big part and a big reason why Buffalo has started off to a decent start to begin this season. He's got 10 goals, 5 assists. This guy loves to shoot the puck. He's got one of the best shots on the Buffalo Sabres right now. He's got 60 shots on the season, and he's racked up 161 fantasy points for them. So I've actually picked him up for my fantasy league too, and he's done tremendous for me this last week. In his last 3 games, he's got 4 goals and 0 assists. So he's getting the goals right there because he loves to shoot the puck so much. I've got Tage Thompson, and I just love the way he's played so far this year.
I like that pick a lot too. He's got a great opportunity there, and he's really exceeding expectations. A lot of times you can get a great player. I was looking at Rasmus Dahlin, in fact, this past week. He's producing really well. He had a down year last year. People want to stay away from Buffalo, but I think they're actually better than a lot of people expect, and there's some really good value to be found there from the Sabres. My next pick is contingent on him being healthy enough to play after he surprisingly missed Sunday's game against Tampa. But I brought him up last week, and his ownership only went up 2% to 29% in Yahoo leagues. If you were one of the managers who added him when I suggested it last week, Matt Zuccarello paid off in a big way despite missing Sunday. He had 3 goals in his first 2 games of the week. Zuccarello now has 6 goals and 16 points in 16 games this year. There's just no way a player this talented scoring at a point per game pace should be owned in less than a third of fantasy leagues right now. Frankly, I'm surprised. I can't even believe it. He's got 5 power play points. He averages more than 2 shots a game, and he's got a +9 on the season. If he can't go, however, I think he's day-to-day right now, so it looks like he should be ready to go for Tuesday. But if he can't, I'd look at Tage Thompson's teammate, Victor Olofsson. He's kind of similar to Thompson's production, loves to shoot the puck. He's only just 31% of fantasy leagues, and he also is producing at a point per game. So if you have a ton of weekly moves and maybe an open IR plus spot with that day-to-day for Zuccarello, you could consider adding them both. Last but not least, players owned in 15% of fantasy leagues or less. Steele, who are you looking at?
Yeah, this guy, I went a little bit over the percentage here, but I couldn't leave this guy out. Mario Ferrero, he's owned at 24%. He's on the San Jose Sharks. This guy is a very, very sneaky player in fantasy leagues this year, and he was a little bit towards the end of last year as well, but I would definitely recommend picking this guy up if you can. He doesn't shoot the puck a lot, but he's got 2 goals on the season. He has 8 assists, but you know what he does? He puts his body on the line every single game. He's got 44 hits, 60 blocks for 164.40 fantasy points on the season. And like I said, it's a very, very sneaky player on defense for the San Jose Sharks. Doesn't like to shoot the puck a lot, but again, when he does get a lot of those rebounds for his teammates, get a lot of those rebounds, and he gets the assists that way. And he's got 2 goals on the season, like I said, for 164.4 fantasy points. So for me, I really like this guy. If you are, hurting a little bit in the defensive area, pick this guy up right now. Very, very sneaky, but he is a tremendous player for your fantasy team.
I consider Ferraro as well. He's really surprisingly doing great in their top 4 there in San Jose. And the fact that he's producing this well offensively without being on a power play unit, I think he deserves a look because maybe he'll even get some time on one of those units if he keeps this up. I'm going to finish with a player I had high hopes for early on in his career. I kind of jumped off the bandwagon, but he might finally be getting it together right now. Max Domi is owned in just 11% of Yahoo leagues. And while it seems like he's been around forever, he's just 26 years old, and he's quietly producing a point per game in Columbus this season. Now, Steele, you picked Boone Jenner as one of your targets last week. I mentioned how he's filling in an offensive hole left by Patrick Laine's injury. Domi is playing on Jenner's wing on that top line, and he's on the right side on the second power play unit. He missed some time with injury, but he has 5 points in his last 4 games. That he's got 3 goals, 9 points in just 9 games this season. So he doesn't contribute that many blocks and hits, but he's usually good for quite a few penalty minutes, a few fights. He averages 1.5 shots per game, and he's yet to record a power play point this season. So the fact that he's at a point per game pace, but hasn't managed to produce with the man advantage, I think if he starts to get a little bit lucky on that unit, he could be even more valuable. So if you're in a deep league and you're desperate for some point production, I'd recommend taking a flyer on Domi while Laine remains out. The Blue Jackets are one of those 4 teams that I mentioned that have 4 games on their schedule this week. That's going to do it for today's episode. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Leave us any fantasy questions or feedback in the comment section below. Follow us on social media. And as always, on behalf of Steele Roden, thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.